Joining us now on this Feast of the Assumption is Chris Stepien, the author of the novel Disciples of Doubt, A Journey with the Messiah's Mother. So, Chris, your novel is told in the perspective of St. John, who I love too, and offers a perspective on the final years of Mary's life, a journey that ultimately culminates in the very event we commemorate today. I can't talk today.
That's all right.
Commemorate today. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, thank you for having me.
Sure.
Good to see you again, Kevin. Good to see you, Jay.
Chris.
The novel was just like my first novel, 3 Days, The Search for the Boy Messiah. This is the sequel, Disciples of Doubt. Both were inspired by praying 1 decade of the rosary a day. I had made a deal with Mary during some hard times years ago, and I said, if I'm going to pray 1 decade a day, please get me closer to your son. And she has her way of doing that. And one day I was contemplating for this story, the fifth sorrowful mystery. Jesus dies on the cross. And something took me to that moment where Jesus leans off the cross in his dying breaths and says, "Woman, behold your son." And turns to John and says, "Behold your mother." And the Gospel, chapter 19 of John says, and from that hour, the disciple took her into his home. Where was home? Soon to be the upper room in the short term. And so I began to think about that John, oh my gosh, what he went through in the upper room with her and for years that follow. And one day he would bury her. He would have to bury her. And so the whole book is Mama Mary, or Ima Miriam in Hebrew, is her funeral. The chapter begins, first chapter, she has just died. Yohanan, John in Hebrew, is sitting against the wall, and the women are cleansing, washing her body for burial the next day. And we go through her funeral procession. We go through his eulogy for her entombment, and the 7 days of Shiva in Hebrew, or Shiva, where they sit in memory of the person and talk about the person. So we literally review her whole life. But because John, of course, had some intimate moments with her to learn from her, and a lot is revealed. And there is another custom in ancient time. There was a second burial. We go all the way through the second burial where the families the preparation for the second burial, because the families would go to gather the bones and place them in an ossuary. That was how people were buried back in the days of Jesus.
Talk about your approach, Chris, if you could, about diving into this as a novel instead of a nonfiction book.
Well, as I said, everything came out of my imaginative prayer. A good friend of mine had taken me to a silent retreat many years ago when I was going through some tough times. It was a Jesuit retreat, and I learned about St. Ignatius of Loyola's concept of pretending that we're in the gospel stories, okay? And then these stories, I would pray 1 decade a day, less was more. I could really contemplate. And then when I first hit on that finding in the temple, the boy Messiah, I thought, oh my gosh, he's lost in a major city, right? We talked about this, Kevin, back then. And I began to then research about the times and how people lived. And it's a blending of both the research of how people actually live, not what we pretend how they live, and then my contemplations. It's kind of like, imagine if you read a book about a great Tuscan chef, but you never ate Italian food, or you loved a sports star. You read about the sports star, but you never went to a game or even watched a game on TV. Or you read about a great musician, but you never had the experience of going to the concert or hearing their recordings. You can't possibly experience it. So it's that marriage between the two that gives birth to that. And I wanted to share my joy of the gospel that could only be expressed, I think, in a story, and filling in the blanks quite realistically. I try to be very realistic. I'm a former documentary producer, director, among other things. So that's my approach.
And tell me, when you were doing the research, was there anything you found that surprised you?
One of the many, Jay, but one of the surprising things is how similar Catholic teaching and our traditions and our beliefs are to Hebrew teaching. I mean, it is our DNA, right? We are all Christians are Hebrew in our DNA, our ancestry. And so the concept of purgatory, well, those who believed in a resurrection of the dead, the Sadducees didn't, but the Pharisees did, they believed that when the body, at death, the soul remained with the body for 3 days. And then at that point, the person's body the soul and the body felt the pain of the decay. And that occurred for 1 year in Gehenna, we know it as. And so, depending on how sinful one was, determined how long you were in Gehenna. But people like to believe that their family members didn't need to be there for the full 12 months. Only the most sinful.
And the book's title, Disciples of Doubt, challenges the conventional image of unwavering faith. What inspired you to focus on the theme of doubt among the earliest followers of Jesus?
Well, remember I said I like to be realistic. Let's look at Jesus and Mary's life. Right from the get-go, Joseph doubts Mary when she says, I'm going to have a child, but it's not your child, it's from the Holy Spirit. And then she goes to visit Elizabeth and Zechariah, or Elisheva and Zachariah, and he had doubted the angel Gabriel that his older wife was going to have John the Baptist. And then it says in the Bible, believe it or not, that Jesus's family doubted him. They thought he was mad, insane. They wanted to pull him off his ministry. And his own community, remember Nazareth, wanted to push him off a cliff because they doubted him and said when he visited his home, he could perform very few signs. Even you go to the Gospel of Matthew, after the resurrection, it says the disciples met Jesus on a mountain where he told them to meet them in Galilee. They adored him and doubted. So he and Mary endured a lot of doubt, in many more cases too.
Well, we're almost out of time, but just one quick last question. We're celebrating the Feast of the Assumption today. How do you portray that in your book, Chris?
Well, short answer, Jay, it's a spoiler alert. So if you're reading it or plan to read it, turn down your volume. I portray it in this way. I ask myself a question. How did John and the early Christians discover Mary's Assumption? Was there a Hebrew tradition that would cause them to open the tomb? You know, people just didn't open the tomb after 3 days. Remember when Jesus wanted to raise Lazarus and he said, open the grave? And what did Martha say? She said, Lord, there will be a stench, certainly. So this is that combination of understanding the way things really were. So if you were listening, you might guess what caused them to open the tomb. One of the traditions I mentioned. But we definitely cover the Assumption. Spoiler alert.
Chris, where can people buy the book or an audiobook version?
Oh, you can get the audiobook, and I do it in the voice of Yohanan because we're in his head for the whole book. That's on Audible. Of course, the paperback and Kindle are on Amazon, and paperback at dynamiccatholic.com because Wellspring Books is my publisher, Matthew Kelly's publishing, one of his publishing brands. So those places you can get the book, and I hope you enjoy it, and it helps you to be creative in your prayer, but in a realistic way.
Chris, always a pleasure. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jay. God bless you.
Thank you.